I am George Young, or Farming George on any of the social medias, and I farm in South Essex on a grade 4 heavy land farm that is pretty knackered. A little bit of background, we're about 500 hectares of arable cropping. I took over about 4 years ago. I've been back on the farm for about 7 now. And what I've been aiming to do in my time on the farm is try and reduce my inputs as much as possible. We're at the moment we've turned into kind of, I think I've missed a slide there. Where are we going? It's not going to let me go back, is it? There we go. So yeah, the farm is so exhausted at the moment that I've actually decided through the stewardship schemes I'm actually taking half the farm out of production now for a long period of time, just to give it a really good rest. When you're on really heavy land, it needs to have a good chance to restructure, sort out, and I also know I need a lot more livestock back on the farm. In terms of some of the history, we did historically grow an awful lot of picking peas. That's something I think would be interesting, Christine. I think within the picking pea industry, you left a lot of nitrogen behind, didn't you? Because the grains hadn't actually finished forming and drying. Whereas now, of course, we're not leaving a huge amount of nitrogen behind some of these crops, as Christine was saying. But the fact that we grew so many picking peas back in the 60s, 70s and early 80s is one of the reasons we've got a lot of problems now. So yeah, our key farm ethics are the fact that I really want to farm as agroecologically as I possibly can. So there are a few kind of things that I'm aiming to do here. One of these things is to have what I'm calling a wilded seam running down the middle of my farm. And it's kind of this idea that I want to make sure there's kind of a super highway for nature to get to every single part of my farm. I think it's a really critical way to be able to farm with less inputs, to be able to farm kind of organically successfully. So at the moment I'm semi-conventional. I'm zero-till. We've been zero-till for about 5 years. I'm zero insecticide for about the same amount of time as well. And we've really cut our fertiliser use, and we've also cut our fungicide use. So on our legumes, we never use any fungicides whatsoever, and we're about half the fungicide, on our wheat crops. I am beginning organic conversion this year, but only on 20 hectares, and that's a 20-hectare field that I'm putting agroforestry into. So I think that agroforestry is a really kind of key part to building an agroecological farm, which is then going to enable kind of mitigation against insect issues and all those kind of things. What is the next slide? Is it going to go? Otherwise I'll just grab my book. There we go. So my farming rotation. So I don't actually really conform to any kind of rotation, but there are a number of crops I grow, and I'm always looking for more and more crops to kind of fulfill a more diverse farming system. So on the right-hand side, those are my kind of conventional, left-hand side, those are my conventional crops. So obviously wheat, rape, beans, peas, and then messing around with some linseed and some spring rape as well, especially this year. But then on the fun side, so the things that actually keep me interested, I'm growing heritage wheat, I'm growing buckwheat, hemp, lentils, and then this year I'm experimenting with heritage corn, and I'm really keen to experiment with heritage barley as well, which is hopefully going to be on next year's agenda. And in terms of the stuff on the right-hand side there, all of those crops are grown zero-till and what I call zero-till organic, which basically means they're grown just with glyphosate pre-drilling. That's the only chemical they ever get on them in that time. So I'm kind of slowly tending towards an organic system, and hopefully I'll get there. Okay, so it all boils down to how I kind of make my decisions of what kind of crops I want to grow. And I look at it from kind of two perspectives. One is kind of the agronomic side, so what my farm actually really needs, and then one is the kind of human side, what do we need as a population to survive going forward. So agronomically, as I said, we're on really, really heavy land, and we don't actually really suit spring crops. However, I know that spring crops are really necessary for my farm to function well, so I'm therefore looking for spring crops that I can seed pretty late. So things like the buckwheat, the hemp, the lentils, all of those are perfectly happy being seeded in May, which means that I'm pretty confident that I can get a decent establishment in May, or even kind of mid-May, maybe even June for some of these crops, and still be able to get them to harvest in time. I'm also looking for kind of crops grow really, really quickly, have got some decent height, have got some good kind of cultural controls for various things like insects or like weeds and those kind of bits and pieces. And yeah, obviously a sensible harvest time. But then from a human perspective, what I'm really looking for is what we need nutritionally in our diet. Now, especially considering the fact we've got a really large vegan movement going on, it's obviously important to make sure that we are producing some good protein for vegans. However, I've got various issues with when we grow an awful lot of lentils, a lot of pulses, sorry. And consequently, this is why I'm looking at kind of some of the things like hemp that's got really, really high protein levels, and any other crops that we can kind of diversify a little bit kind of differently to just doing pulses. So here's what buckwheat looks like. It was a really nice harvest this year. It happened to be a really nice harvest last year. Both of them are late, so they're kind of, we managed to get it mid-September this year, late September last year, or 2 years ago. But it's a really pretty crop. That's also kind of pretty key for me to grow crops that are attractive. This is hemp. There's Winston in the middle. That was harvested on the 28th of October this year, which was getting exciting as to whether or not I was going to get it. The pigeons seem to like it, so that's nice. Also, I'm not allowed to pick the leaves, but I can tell you, if you pick the leaves and make tea out of it, it's really, really nice. Just don't tell the Home Office if anyone's here. So one of the things I really love about hemp, just by the way, I mean, this went in very, very non-ideal conditions. I didn't get my license until the 3rd week of May, so I went in the 3rd week of May, literally on the day I got my license, and it still grew 3 meters tall, and it looked dreadful. It didn't get any rain. It went into an incredibly dry seabed. Didn't get any rain for, I think, about 4 weeks, and it still yielded kind of okay. So I'm kind of excited about hemp as a crop. Also, as a side point to this, anyone interested in fibre and things like that should check out the Fibre Shed movement. It's a really interesting one with kind of more sustainable textiles. So anyway, so why am I particularly interested in pulses within this? So I'm obviously looking to kind of move away from second cereals. I'm looking to move away from carbon loading and all these problems, especially as a zero-till farmer. Carbon loading can be a really big problem to kind of stopping the next crop moving on. So pulses are really great now, and obviously if you're looking at linseed and oilseed rape, you're still going to be using artificial fertiliser, which I'm trying to get away from, and so pulses are a good choice in that mix. As I kind of alluded to before, I'm very intrigued by what is actually left behind some of these pulse crops in the ground in terms of excess nitrogen, and I think we just need to do a lot more research on that. But the big thing is, if you grow a pulse crop, at least you know you're not dealing with any carbon loading, and you know the next crop's going to get a chance to get away nicely. This is what lentils look like. Now, interestingly, lentils have got quite a few problems because they grow about that tall. So, I mean, that hadn't been cut there, that had. I mean, that's just how flat they are. We still got a decent yield. Also, that little blob there is my mother roguing the lentils, because unfortunately the previous crop to this was spring wheat. Didn't think of any problem about spring wheat or about a wheat crop vernalising, but because it was a spring wheat, even though it was planted in the autumn of the previous year, it was able to grow and set seed, and you can't clean wheat seed out of lentils. So there was a lot of roguing going on this year, which I felt bad to my family about, but never mind. They did a really good job. There are obviously lots of issues, as anyone who's tried growing pulses knows. Huge amount of issues with insects. There's a lot of insects with getting holes in the crop, and the human market is very, very prescriptive as to kind of allowing any holes or anything like that. So I was lucky this year, my yellow peas went into human consumption, but I actually specifically grow yellow peas because they're so much easier not to worry about. And I would really like to see kind of the ability to have better markets for some of these slightly second-grade products that don't just go into the animal feed industry. I understand that kind of monogastrics need protein sources, and it's a good kind of side product, but I would like to see a chance for there to be more use for them in human food. On top of that, there are a lot of soil-borne diseases and nematodes. So my home farm, lots and lots of picking peas in the past. I cannot grow peas on my home farm. One of the intriguing things at the moment with lentils, I grew lentils a couple of years ago and got back what I put in the ground, which is not a particularly sustainable farming model, although it provided me the seed for last year when I got a really nice yield. So we need to kind of figure out what pulse crops are affected by the same disease problems as other pulse crops, what soil-borne diseases there are, all those kind of things. I have a feeling that lentils are affected by the same nematodes or same soil-borne diseases as peas would be. And so yes, we move on to the questions that I've got. Like I say, can we have a human market for these less perfect crops? be that like a flower or something like that. I think there's a lot of use for protein flowers, so it'd be really cool if that market could be expanded. Lots of research needs doing on what the rotational gap needs to be between pulse crops. I think it needs to be about 10 years. I don't think 5 or 6 years is enough. And then, yeah, what commonalities have we got between the diseases, the soil-borne diseases, the nematodes, and what are the benefits and how can we deal with, again, as Christian alluded to, how can we deal with intercropping and then separating the crops out after that. So anyway, thank you very much.